I remember the exact smell of the coffee that morning. Stale, a hint of burnt sugar, the kind of cheap blend we bought when money was tight. It should have been mundane, ordinary, the kind of domestic detail that anchors a life together. Instead, it felt like the last scrap of a life I thought I knew. 2 months earlier, my wife, Anna, had packed a small suitcase, left a note on the kitchen counter with 3 neat lines, and driven off with the kind of certainty I'd only ever seen in movies. "I need more," the note said. No names, no promises, no explanation. Just those 2 words and a blank space where a future used to be. For a while, I lived in the strange exhaust of that note. It made every room feel like an interrogation. Her side of the closet still smelled faintly of her perfume. Her toothbrush was in the bathroom cabinet like she intended to return. Her picture on my phone stared back like a ghost. People said time would blur the edges, but grief doesn't blur, it etches. Every morning, I'd wake up and try to remember what had gone wrong. Not in the big, obvious ways. I knew we'd grown out of sync, that the promises we made at 22 had aged into compromises, but in the tiny betrayals, the way she stopped laughing at my jokes, the way she spent nights scrolling past me to feed some strange appetite that wasn't mine. Then I heard his name. I didn't expect it. It was like a stone dropped into a cup of still water, and the ripples hit everything I owned. "Marcus," someone at the office said, carelessly, thinking I wouldn't notice. Marcus was her ex, the one she'd dated before me, the one she'd always called too reckless and too charming, and then, later, a mistake. The rumor was that he'd become successful, swallowed ambitions she'd once mocked, and was now wealthy in a way that measured in houses, not just in Instagram photos. From the snippets I overheard, he'd moved back into town, opened a business, and reappeared like a character returning to claim a scene that once been his. The first time I saw him in person, it felt like a bad card trick. We were both at the same cafe, because of course we were. Life jostles you into the strangest coincidences when you're already on your knees. He was exactly as I remembered, and entirely different all at once. Broader in the shoulders, a confident jawline softened by a practiced smile, and eyes that had the same reckless spark I'd once envied. He wore expensive shoes and an even more expensive watch. The coffee? On him. He moved with the kind of calm a man has when money cushions his mistakes. I tried to be casual. We exchanged the brittle pleasantries reserved for men who had once loved the same woman. He asked after Anna with a smirk, and I felt my face go thin. "She's finding herself," I said, and it sounded like a sentence I'd borrowed from someone else. Marcus tilted his head like he was assessing a puzzle. Then, with the careless cruelty of someone who'd been handed the world on a silver platter, he said, "She always did have an eye for something better." There it was. The explanation, or at least the version they rehearsed in each other's company. She hadn't left for me, but for anything I'd done. She'd left for something else. For someone with stories that were louder and pockets that were deeper. That's the narrative the town loves. Success attracts, failure repels. I felt absurdly small, like a photograph in a wallet being replaced by a newer picture. But the truth is, I'd been building a small life to be proud of. A modest house, a business I'd started that paid the bills. Plans, quiet, careful plans for the future. None of it mattered to the romance of reinvention that Marcus represented. For weeks after that encounter, life became an archaeology of our relationship. I dug through the calendar of our life and found dates we'd missed, conversations we'd let slide, the tiny, compassionate detachments that turn people into strangers. I called friends. I replayed old voicemails. I even drove past places we'd frequented, The little Thai place on Henderson where she'd said yes to forever, and the bench by the river where she'd confessed her fear of never being enough. It was obsessive, ugly, and honest. Pain makes you a thief. You steal back the past in small, desperate ways. Then, on a gray Thursday that smelled of rain and lost patience, I got a call from Anna. Her voice, when it came, was too steady. "Can we meet?" she asked. I wanted to say no, to let the wound patch on its own, but curiosity is a hunger that never sleeps. We met at the river bench we used to visit, when the world seemed simpler. She arrived with a scarf, knotted the way she liked, hair longer and lighter from a summer I hadn't shared. She looked different, not in that shiny, expensive way, but inwardly. There was a restlessness around her that was new, like someone who'd learned a different language but hadn't yet decided whether to speak it. We talked about small things at first, the weather, the neighborhood. Then the conversation shifted, as conversations do when something unsaid becomes too heavy to carry. "I'm sorry," she said, and for a second my chest unclenched. That's the most dangerous word when you're still tender. It promises and withholds at the same time. She said she'd been lost, that the life she wanted didn't fit the one she'd chosen with me. She said Marcus had offered a glimpse of something she'd always wanted, a version of herself that was bold, visible, and unabashed. "I thought I could be that person," she said, looking away. "With him, I thought I needed to know I could be seen. I wanted to ask the obvious questions. How long? Why now?" But they felt petty. Instead, I asked the only thing that mattered to me then. "Were you happy?" She looked at me like I'd asked her to remember a name she'd deliberately forgotten. "For a while," she admitted. "At first, yes, it felt like a relief." Relief. There's a slimness to that word that cut me deeper than anger. Relief from what? From me? From responsibility? From the quiet compromises of marriage that, in her mind, must have felt like a slow suffocation. But then she said something I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't what I thought. Her voice broke, and the rest of the words tumbled out like a confession. Marcus, it turned out, wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined. Yes, his business had soared, and his lifestyle glittered, but there was a cost. He was controlling in ways that didn't make good headlines. He made decisions for her with a patronizing pride. He belittled the very parts of her she'd always loved, her spontaneity, her messy art projects, the way she laughed too loud. She had traded one set of constraints for another, wrapped in nicer paper. "And then," she said, voice small, "I found out about the other thing." "What other thing?" I asked, because in the bare cold of that bench, every secret felt like it would splinter me. She paused, fingers worrying the edge of the scarf. She told me about a hidden life Marcus kept. Not an affair, not in the way we understand it, but a secret that ate at the foundation of his success. He'd built an empire on promises he never intended to keep. There were shady contracts, shell companies, men who suddenly had less money and more problems. She spoke of late-night whispers in the office and men who feared his phone. She said she had seen documents, legal things that made her stomach twist, but she'd kept them to herself because she'd been dazzled. Hearing that, something in me shifted, not because I took pleasure in Marcus's potential downfall. Revenge isn't pretty, but because the narrative that had been polished and presented to the world was cracking. The man who'd taken my wife with the easiest of smiles had foundations of sand. I still felt betrayed, yes, and hollow, with the kind of grief that rearranges bones. But I also felt something like vindication, the certainty that not everything that glitters is gold. We talked until the sky turned a bruise of purple and the dogs were being walked home. She apologized for the mess she'd made, for the selfishness, for the embarrassment she'd caused. I listened, not because I wanted to take her back. I wasn't ready for that, and the thought felt like stepping onto ice I wasn't sure would hold. But because I needed to understand the person she'd become. Understanding doesn't mean forgiving. It just means you know the shape of the thing that hurt you. She left that night with no promises. She hugged me, awkward and brief, and said, "I don't know what I want." Her words landed like a pebble that broke the surface of a lake, quiet and spreading circles into places I'd stopped looking. I walked home feeling heavier and lighter at once. Heavy with the knowledge of what she'd done. Lighter because the myth of Marcus had been tarnished in a way that made the story we'd been told about leaving for better fall apart. That week, small things happened that felt significant in a way small things aren't supposed to be. Her friends stopped defending her actions so loudly in public. A mutual acquaintance whispered at a party that Marcus's company had missed a major payment and that suppliers were getting nervous. I found a receipt in a cafe trash can, an old invoice with a company name that matched one of the shell names she'd mentioned. Someone had slammed a door somewhere in a deal that had gone wrong. It was sloppy, indiscreet, and exactly the kind of weakness that pushes bravado to panic. I kept my distance. I didn't want to gloat, and I certainly didn't want to court her pity. But human beings are not built to watch certainty crumble without feeling anything. I checked public records, which is a polite way of saying I spent an unhealthy amount of time trying to find proof of something that might not be true. And then, like a quiet confession from the universe, an article appeared online, the sort of investigative piece you stumble upon because someone else decided to look. It wasn't sensational, it was methodical. Marcus's company was under scrutiny for misappropriation of funds, contract fraud, the kind of legal trouble that turns late-night parties into late-night calls to lawyers. My heart did something weird then. Not a triumphant leap, but a slow, careful beat, like a clock that had been allowed to keep time again. This wasn't about me winning. It was about the truth coming out. It was about the story that had been sold to my wife finally revealing the strings. I bookmarked the article and sat on it like a loaded secret. I knew it wouldn't fix anything overnight. People don't come back because of headlines. Hearts aren't repaired by justice. But there is a strange arithmetic to life. Sometimes the scale of who you are tips, not because someone pushes you, but because truth finds its way. And when truth starts to appear, everything else begins to rearrange itself. Loyalties, illusions, and the cold calculations of people who think themselves immune. That's where I left the story for a while, on that bench, with rain threatening and a half-digested sense that something irreversible had begun. I couldn't know the shape of the returning storm, or whether Anna would come back to me. But I could feel the axis shifting, and I could plan, in secret ways, how I might stand when the winds finally changed. 2 weeks passed before I heard from Anna again. I'd started sleeping better by then, not because the pain had faded, but because my mind had finally accepted that she was gone. Acceptance doesn't mean peace. It's more like exhaustion that looks like calm. My mornings had a pattern again. Black coffee, a walk around the block, and an hour staring at the computer screen pretending to work. I told myself I was moving on, though deep down, I was waiting, not for her, but for closure, whatever that might look like. Then one evening, as the sun melted behind the horizon, my phone buzzed. Anna. The name alone was enough to pull every old feeling back to the surface. I let it ring once, twice before picking up. Her voice was different, quieter, brittle around the edges. "Can we talk?" she said. "I thought we already did," I replied. "I know, but things have changed." We agreed to meet at a diner halfway between her apartment and my place. I got there first, sat in a booth facing the door, and waited. She arrived looking smaller somehow, not in body, but in spirit. She wore the same scarf from our last meeting, though this time it wasn't tied neatly. When she sat down, I noticed her hands shaking slightly. "I made a mistake," she said before the waitress even came for our order. "Marcus isn't who he pretends to be. He's in trouble, real trouble. And I think people are going to get hurt." She wasn't being dramatic. I could hear the panic under her words. She told me the business Marcus owned had started collapsing from the inside. Investors were pulling out, his partners were turning on him, and the authorities were circling. What scared her most wasn't the fall itself, but the way Marcus was reacting to it. "He's paranoid," she said. "He thinks everyone's betrayed him. He's been drinking more, shouting at people. I've seen him throw things. Sorry, he's not the same man." I felt a flicker of something dark. Not sympathy, not yet revenge, just a grim satisfaction that the truth was finally catching up. Still, seeing Anna that afraid stirred something protective in me. She'd made her choices, yes, but I didn't want her to become collateral damage in someone else's downfall. "What do you want me to do, Anna?" I asked carefully. "I don't know," she whispered. "I just needed to talk to someone who doesn't want anything from me. Someone who remembers who I used to be." That line hit me harder than I expected. Because she was right. I did remember. I remembered the girl who stayed up late painting terrible watercolors, who used to fall asleep on the couch with her head in my lap. Somewhere beneath the mistakes, that person still existed. She told me more about Marcus's secret dealings, offshore accounts, fake invoices, even property under other people's names. He'd been paying journalists to keep stories quiet and threatening those who didn't comply. "He's scared of exposure," she said. "If this comes out, he'll lose everything. And he knows I've seen the documents." That's when it clicked. She wasn't just frightened for him. She was frightened of him. "Has he hurt you?" I asked. She hesitated just long enough for me to know the answer. "Not physically," she said, "but he's not safe anymore." I felt my jaw tighten. My first instinct was to tell her to go to the police, but she was terrified of becoming part of the investigation. "He'll destroy me if I talk," she said. "He'll make sure everyone believes I was part of it." I leaned back, staring at her. "You left me because you thought he was successful, Anna. Now you're sitting here telling me he's a criminal." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I know. You don't have to remind me what I gave up." There was silence between us for a long time, broken only by the hum of the diner's neon light. Then she reached into her purse and slid a small USB drive across the table. "This has everything," she whispered. "Emails, contracts, bank records, all of it. If anything happens to me, I want you to know the truth." I stared at the little drive like it was a live wire. "Why me?" "Because you're the only person who won't use it for money or leverage. You'll do what's right." That was rich, coming from someone who'd left me for a richer man. But I can see that she meant it. I took the USB, tucked it into my jacket, and said, "Go home. Pack your things. Leave the city for a while. I'll figure something out." She nodded, whispered "thank you," and left without finishing her drink. I watched her go, wondering when my life had turned into a crime story. That night, I sat at my desk and stared at the drive. My curiosity warred with my sense of caution. In the end, curiosity won. I plugged it in. The folders were neatly arranged. Contracts, transfers, shellco, correspondence. Inside were hundreds of files, PDFs, scanned receipts, email threads. As I clicked through them, the picture became clear. Marcus wasn't just bending the law, he was strangling it. Money laundering, tax evasion, manipulation of investors, all carefully orchestrated through a web of fake companies. And then I found something that made my stomach drop. An email chain that mentioned Anna's name. Marcus had used her identity to sign a few transactions, probably without her full understanding. If the investigation caught wind of that, she'd be implicated. It was suddenly bigger than betrayal. It was survive. The next few days blurred together. I contacted a lawyer friend from college, a man I trusted enough to keep quiet. I told him, in vague terms, that someone I knew had information about a corrupt businessman and needed advice on how to handle it. He warned me to be careful, that people like Marcus had long arms and short tempers. Meanwhile, Anna texted me updates, short, frightened messages about Marcus's behavior. He hasn't slept in 2 days. He's smashing things. He thinks someone's leaking info. Each one made my stomach twist tighter. Then, one night, the messages stopped. I didn't hear from her for 3 days. I called. No answer. I drove past her apartment, lights off. Her car was gone. Panic gnawed at me, a familiar ache that pulled me back into all the worst memories. Finally, on the 4th night, she called from an unknown number. "Tom," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm at my sister's place. He found out I talked to someone. He doesn't know who, but he's furious. Please, don't tell anyone we met." "I won't," I promised. "Just stay safe." When we hung up, I realized what she didn't know, that Marcus was already being investigated. The article I'd seen online was just the beginning. Anonymous tips were flooding the authorities. The kind of storm she feared had already begun, and I had the thunder in my hands. I didn't want to ruin anyone's life, but part of me wanted justice. Not just for me, but for the quiet, careful man I'd been before all of this. The one she'd underestimated. The one who didn't need revenge, but deserved truth. So I made a decision. I'd send the documents anonymously to the journalist who'd written the original article. No names, no explanations, just proof. Let the world deal with Marcus. It took me hours to craft the email. When I finally hit send, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from something that felt like freedom. That night, I slept for the first time in months, deep, dreamless, and clean. I didn't know what the fallout would be, not yet, but I knew one thing. The man who'd stolen my wife, with charm and wealth, was about to learn that every secret comes with a bill. And when the truth comes knocking, it doesn't ask politely. 3 days after I sent the anonymous email, the world began to tilt. It started small, a single headline tucked in the business section of a local newspaper. Prominent entrepreneur under investigation for financial misconduct. No name was mentioned, but I didn't need one. The description fit Marcus like a tailored suit. By the next morning, his name was everywhere. Television, social media, news blogs, they all buzzed with speculation. At first, the coverage was careful, respectful even, the way media handles stories about rich men with expensive lawyers. But within 48 hours, it changed. Documents had surfaced, real ones, the same kind I'd seen on that USB drive. Wire transfers, falsified contracts, evidence of embezzlement. The journalist I'd emailed must have verified everything, because the story exploded into a full-scale scandal. Marcus's company went into lockdown. Employees were being questioned. Investors were pulling out. The offices were raided by financial investigators in suits and latex gloves. Photos leaked online. Marcus with his head down, trying to push past reporters shouting questions. He looked smaller in those pictures, stripped of the arrogance that used to fill every room he entered. I didn't feel joy exactly, but there was a quiet, cold satisfaction. The universe had finally balanced the scales, even if only for a moment. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling like the air was borrowed. Then came the inevitable phone call. It was Anna. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "You've seen the news?" she asked. "I have." "He's losing everything, Tom. Everything. He's been calling me non-stop. I think he knows I'm the one who had the files." I hesitated. "Do you think he suspects me?" "No," she said quickly. "He doesn't even know we met, but he's desperate. He says people are turning against him, that someone's setting him up." She let out a shaky breath. "He's paranoid and drunk all the time. I'm scared, Tom." I wanted to tell her it was over, that she was finally free, but life doesn't wrap up that neatly. The kind of men like Marcus don't go down quietly. They claw, they bite, they burn everything on the way down. That night, I got home late and sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker. My phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. "You think you can destroy me? I know what you did." My stomach dropped. There was no name, but I didn't need one. The timing was perfect, the tone unmistakable. Marcus. I double-checked the locks, every window, every door. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I hadn't left any digital trail. I'd used a public Wi-Fi network, a fake email. But paranoia doesn't care about logic. Over the next few days, the tension built like a slow-moving storm. Marcus's empire was collapsing. More whistleblowers came forward. A former partner confirmed the fraud. Bank accounts were frozen. He was summoned for questioning. His face was on every channel. The fallen businessman, the self-made man who wasn't really self-made after all. And through it all, Anna called me almost daily. Not to ask for forgiveness, not even to talk about us, just to feel safe. I could hear the guilt in her voice, the regret that ran deeper than fear. "I keep thinking," she said once, "about the night I left you, about the look on your face when I closed the door." I didn't respond. Some memories don't need commentary. They just hang between two people like ghosts. On the 5th night after the scandal broke, she showed up at my house. It was raining, hard, relentless, the kind of rain that makes the air smell like electricity. I opened the door, and there she was, soaked, shivering, eyes red from crying. "Please," she said, voice cracking, "can I come in?" I stepped aside. She stood in the living room, dripping onto the rug, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. "It's the same," she murmured. "Everything's the same." "Yeah," I said quietly. "Some of us don't change that fast." She winced, but didn't argue. I handed her a towel and made coffee. Not because I wanted to play host, but because it was the only thing that made sense. When she finally spoke again, her voice was small. "He's been arrested." I froze. "Marcus?" She nodded. "This afternoon, they found everything. The accounts, the shell companies, even offshore transfers. He's facing years in prison. And he's blaming me." Her hands trembled around the coffee mug. "He said I ruined him, that I was ungrateful. He said if he ever gets out, he'll make sure I lose everything too." I sat down across from her. "You didn't ruin him, Anna. He did that himself." She looked up at me then, really looked, the way she used to when she still trusted me. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I kept thinking I'd find happiness somewhere else, that you were too simple, too content. I thought I wanted excitement, ambition, danger." She gave a bitter laugh. "I got it. Every last bit of it." There it was, the confession I'd been waiting for, but it didn't land the way I imagined. I thought hearing her admit she was wrong would feel like victory. It didn't. It felt like sadness, like watching someone wake up after a long sleep to realize the world had moved on without them. She put the cup down and took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry, Tom. I really am. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to tell you that I know what I lost. For a long time, Neither of us spoke. The rain outside softened to a drizzle, and the house felt smaller somehow, quieter, but not uncomfortable. Finally, I said, "You don't need to explain anymore, Anna. You made your choices, and so did I." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean I can't go back. Not after everything. You didn't just leave me. You broke something I can't fix. But that doesn't mean I want to see you suffer." Tears slid down her face, silent and clean. She nodded slowly, understanding. "I wouldn't come back even if you asked me to," she said softly. "Not because I don't love you, but because I don't deserve to." That was the first honest thing she'd said in years. We talked for a while longer, about practical things, about her plans, her sister, the possibility of moving to another city to start over. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think you were the safest place in the world." I was right. Then she left. No dramatic goodbye, no lingering look, just the sound of her car pulling away into the wet night. In the weeks that followed, the story of Marcus's downfall consumed the news. He was charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. His assets were seized, his reputation shredded. Former allies turned witnesses. The empire he built on lies collapsed faster than anyone expected. ... People in town whispered that Anna had been the reason the truth came out, that she'd leaked the files herself. She didn't correct them, and I didn't either. Some lies are better when they serve justice. One morning, a month later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a short note. "You were right about everything. I've started over. It's quiet, and for the first time in a long while, I feel free. Thank you for not turning away when you had every reason to. Anna." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer beside my desk. Not as a keepsake, but as proof that sometimes closure doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in the quiet acceptance that the past is finally behind you. That evening, I stood by the same river where she'd first told me she was leaving. The water moved slow, heavy with rain from the night before. I thought about everything: the betrayal, the revenge, the justice that came disguised as truth. And I realized something simple but profound. Revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes, it's just watching life reveal the truth you already knew. The world hadn't given me back what I lost, but it had given me something better: peace. And as the last light of sunset rippled across the water, I whispered to the wind, not in anger, but in calm finality. She left for gold and came back for mercy. Then I turned, walked away, and didn't look back. 6 months later, the world looked different, not because it had changed much. The same city lights blinked, the same cafes buzzed, and the same streets hummed with life, but because I had. I'd stopped checking headlines for Marcus's name, stopped expecting Anna's number to appear on my screen. The past had finally settled into what it was always meant to be: a closed chapter. But healing isn't a single moment. It's a long walk through quiet corridors of your own mind. Some mornings, I'd wake up and almost reach for her side of the bed, before remembering it was just me now. Other mornings, I'd catch myself smiling at something small: sunlight on the counter, the smell of rain, and realize I was okay. Maybe not whole, but okay. I'd focused on rebuilding what I'd let crumble. My small business had grown. I hired 2 new employees and opened a second location. Friends who'd gone quiet during the breakup started calling again. Life, in its stubborn way, moved forward. Then one crisp November morning, as I scrolled through the news, I saw a headline that made me pause. Marcus Hale sentenced to 12 years for fraud and embezzlement. There he was, photographed in handcuffs, eyes hollow. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the same exhaustion I'd worn months ago. The world that once admired him now spat his name like a curse. The story detailed everything: the millions he stole, the people he manipulated, the web of deceit that finally strangled him. Justice had taken its time, but it had come. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt nothing, just a distant echo of satisfaction and a strange pity for a man who'd built his castle out of sand. Because somewhere, buried beneath the deceit, Marcus had been human once, ambitious, insecure, maybe even lonely. We were both men who'd lost themselves in trying to prove something. The difference was, I'd found my way back. That night, I sat by the window with a glass of bourbon, thinking about the strange circle life had drawn. Anna's words came back to me. You were the safest place in the world. At the time, it had felt like an apology. Now, it felt like peace. A few weeks later, I received another letter. This one from Anna again. The envelope was worn, postmarked from a coastal town hundreds of miles away. Inside was a single photo, her standing near the sea, hair blowing in the wind, a soft smile on her face. On the back, she'd written, "New life, no lies. Thank you for letting me find it." I stared at that photo for a long time. She looked older but lighter, as if the storm had finally passed. I didn't write back. There was nothing left to say. Forgiveness doesn't always need words. Sometimes silence is the kindest reply. Over the following months, people stopped mentioning her. The gossip faded. The wounds everyone had whispered about healed quietly behind closed doors. Life moved on, and so did I. I started seeing someone new, a woman named Claire, kind and grounded, who laughed easily and didn't ask too many questions about the past. We met at a local bookstore. She worked in marketing, had a golden retriever, and loved the same cheap coffee I did. On our third date, she asked me, "Have you ever been in love before?" I smiled faintly and said, "Yes, once." It taught me everything I needed to know about who I don't want to be. She nodded as if she understood, and maybe she did. Some people carry old stories in their eyes. They don't need the details to recognize a scar. Time has a way of folding the past into something manageable. The pain dulls, the anger loses its edges, and what's left is the quiet lesson that love built on lies will always collapse, no matter how pretty the view from the top looks. A year after Anna left, I visited that riverside bench again. The air was cold, the water dark and steady. I sat there for a while, thinking about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the downfall, the redemption. I realized that the real revenge wasn't Marcus going to prison or Anna realizing her mistake. The real revenge was living well, moving forward without bitterness, refusing to let the pain define the rest of my life. Because here's the truth I'd learned the hard way. Sometimes the sweetest form of revenge is peace. Not shouting your story to the world, not making sure everyone knows you were right. Just quietly becoming everything they said you couldn't be. As I watched the river glide past, I thought back to that morning when it all began. The cold coffee, the empty house, the note that said, "I need more." Back then, I thought more meant money, adventure, excitement. Now, I understood it differently. Maybe more was never about things or people. Maybe it was about knowing your worth, about refusing to shrink yourself for someone else's approval. When I left the river that day, I didn't look back. The past no longer had anything new to show me. In the following years, my life took on a quiet rhythm. The business grew steadily. Claire and I traveled, laughed, and built something easy, something real. She never pried into my old wounds, and I never felt the need to hide them. Love, I learned, isn't about possession or performance. It's about peace, the kind that sits with you in silence and still feels full. Sometimes, when the night is still and the world feels honest, I think about Anna and wonder where life took her next. I hope she found the version of herself she'd been chasing. I hope she learned that success doesn't fix the emptiness inside. Mostly, I hope she's happy, truly happy, because wishing misery on someone else keeps you chained to them forever. Every story has a villain, a victim, and a survivor. But in real life, sometimes they're all the same person at different points in time. If you told me years ago that I'd thank the woman who broke my heart, I'd have laughed. But now I get it. Without her betrayal, I might never have found my strength. Without losing her, I might never have learned what real love and real peace feel like. The past is not a wound anymore. It's a scar, proof that I survived, that I healed, and that I learned. And every time someone new walks into my cafe and compliments the warmth of the place, I smile. They don't know the story behind it, the pain that built these walls, the lessons that shaped this peace. But that's okay. Some stories are meant to stay quiet once they've done their work. Before closing each night, I wipe the tables, switch off the lights, and stand at the door for a moment, just listening to the hum of the city. Then I whisper, almost out of habit, "Thank you." Not to Anna, not to Marcus, but to life itself, for breaking me, for teaching me, for rebuilding me stronger than before. Because in the end, revenge wasn't watching them fall. Revenge was standing tall when they thought I never would. And that, more than anything, was enough.